The Afghan sun beat down like a hammer on an anvil, turning the rocky outpost into an oven. Staff Sergeant Marcus Chen wiped sweat from his eyes and watched Lieutenant Rodriguez reach for his canteen. It was 13:47 hours, and Chen was thinking about the care package his wife had sent, chocolate chip cookies that had melted into a brown brick in the heat. Then Rodriguez's shoulder exploded in a mist of red. The lieutenant dropped like a puppet with cut strings, his canteen clattering across the rocks, water spilling into the dust. For one frozen heartbeat, nobody moved. Then training kicked in. Sniper! Chen launched himself from cover, sliding across scorching stone to grab Rodriguez by his vest. The younger man's eyes were wide with shock, mouth opening and closing soundlessly. Chen dragged him behind the concrete barrier as another round cracked overhead, so close he felt the pressure wave. Medic, medic! Specialist Davis was already running low, medical bag bouncing against his hip. Around the outpost, soldiers scrambled for cover, pressing themselves against sandbags and concrete, eyes scanning the mountains for a target they couldn't see. Chen pressed his hands against Rodriguez's wound, blood hot and slick between his fingers. "Stay with me, Lieutenant. You're okay. You're gonna be okay." My arm," Rodriguez gasped, his face going pale. "Your arm is fine, flesh wound. You'll have a cool scar for the baby." Chen kept his voice steady even as his heart hammered. 3 soldiers hit in 2 days, 3, and they still hadn't even seen the bastard. Davis skidded in beside them, already pulling out gauze. Through and through, upper shoulder, he's lucky. But his eyes said what they both knew, luck was running out. 30 minutes later, with Rodriguez stabilized and evacuated to the medical tent, Chen stood with his spotter, Corporal Davis, scanning the mountains through high-powered optics. The Hindu Kush stretched endlessly before them, jagged peaks, deep valleys, and 1,000 caves where a ghost could hide. "Anything?" Chen asked, though he already knew the answer. "Negative, thermals got nothing. This guy's a phantom." Davis lowered his scope, frustration etched on his dust-caked face. "It's like he shoots from a different position every time." "No." Chen shook his head slowly, something nagging at his combat-honed instincts. "Same position. Has to be. Look at the angle of impact on all 3 hits, always high and from the northeast." He pulled out his range finder and started glassing the mountains systematically, section by section. The outpost had become a prison. 32 soldiers trapped in a rocky bowl, resupply delayed, and an invisible enemy picking them off whenever someone got careless. Or unlucky. The psychological warfare was working. Chen could see it in the way his men moved, hunched and fearful, sprinting between positions rather than walking. Then he saw it. A glint, just for a microsecond, sunlight catching glass or metal. He locked his optics on the spot, a cave entrance barely visible, carved into the mountainside. "Got you," Chen breathed. He did a quick mental calculation using known distances to closer landmarks. His stomach dropped. Jesus Christ. "What?" Davis leaned in. "That cave, range it." Davis worked his laser rangefinder, frowned, recalibrated, tried again. "That can't be right. I'm getting 4,200 yards, 2.4 miles. He looked at Chen. "That's impossible. Nobody can shoot that far." "Somebody can." Chen stared at that distant cave, a dark smudge against gray rock. The position was brilliant, high elevation, perfect line of sight down into the outpost, and so far away that return fire was meaningless. The shooter could operate with impunity. "I'm taking the shot." Chen grabbed his M110 sniper rifle, a weapon he'd used to make kills at 800 yards. He knew it was inadequate for this range, but he had to try. He calculated elevation, adjusted for wind, southwest at 6 knots, breathed out slowly and squeezed. The rifle cracked. Through his scope, Chen watched his bullet kick up dust on the mountainside, a good 200 yards short of the cave. Not even close. As if in response, a bullet punched through the sandbags 2 feet from his head, spraying sand into his face. The message was clear: I can hit you. You can't hit me. Chen rolled back into cover, spitting dirt. Son of a bitch is playing with us. Over the next 6 hours, it became a shooting gallery. Sergeant Cooper tried, 20 years of experience, steady as a rock. His bullet fell short. Martinez, their designated marksman, tried twice. Both misses. Even grizzled Master Sergeant Kowalski, with 47 confirmed kills and a Silver Star, took his shot. The bullet disappeared into the valley without trace. By nightfall, 15 shots had been fired at that cave. 15 failures. Chen sat in the medical tent that night, watching Rodriguez sleep fitfully, his shoulder bandaged and his face pale. The kid was 23, had a baby daughter named Emma he'd never met. She'd been born 2 weeks after his deployment. His wife sent pictures every week. Rodriguez kept them in his helmet, looked at them before every patrol. "Hey, Staff Sergeant." Corporal Williams appeared at the tent flap, his young face tight with fear. "The guys are talking. They're saying we're sitting ducks. That sniper's got us zeroed. He's just waiting, picking us off." "We're working on it, Williams." "Working on what? Nobody can make that shot. It's over 2 miles through wind, uphill." The corporal's voice cracked. "Sir, I got a bad feeling, like tomorrow's gonna be. I just got a bad feeling." After Williams left, Chen sat in the darkness, listening to Rodriguez's labored breathing and the distant sound of soldiers arguing. He pulled out his tablet, scrolling through personnel files he probably shouldn't have access to, looking for something, anything. Then he found her. Master Sergeant Riley Morrison, Special Operations, sniper qualification scores that made him blink and check twice, training notes, exceptional performance at extended range, demonstrated consistent accuracy at 3,800 yards under adverse conditions, recommended for extreme distance scenarios. There was a video, grainy footage from a training exercise, a small figure in desert camouflage, lying prone with a massive rifle. The target board was barely visible even through the camera's zoom. The rifle fired. 6 seconds later, 6 impossibly long seconds, the target pinged. 3,800 yards, hit. Chen played it again and again. "You're crazy," he told himself. Morrison had only been with the unit for 8 months. She was unproven in real combat at these distances, and she was a woman, which meant the old guard would fight him tooth and nail. But Rodriguez was 23 with a baby girl. Williams was scared he'd die tomorrow. And 15 expert shooters had already failed. Chen closed his tablet and reached for the radio. His career was about to get very interesting. Or very short. "This is Outpost Delta requesting immediate air transport and personnel support," he said into the handset, his voice steady despite his pounding heart. "I need Master Sergeant Riley Morrison, and I need her now." Command tent smelled like stale coffee, diesel fuel, and the perpetual dust that infiltrated everything in Afghanistan. Colonel Hastings looked up from his reports, eyes bloodshot from 72 hours of managing 3 separate operations across the province. He was a thick-necked man from Georgia, with 30 years in the Corps and opinions formed in concrete. "You want to send WHO?" His voice started low, dangerous. Staff Sergeant Chen stood at attention, knowing this would be bad but not quite prepared for the colonel's face turning that particular shade of purple. "Master Sergeant Riley Morrison, sir. She's stationed at Fob Warrior about 40 miles south. She's—" "I know who she is," Hastings exploded, slamming both hands on his metal desk. The coffee cup jumped, spilling brown liquid across a map of Kandahar province. "The female sniper, the one they've been parading around like some kind of diversity trophy." "Sir, with respect." "Respect? You want to talk about respect?" Hastings stood up, all 6'3" of him. "You've got Sergeant Cooper right outside this tent, 10 years of combat experience, 47 confirmed kills, distinguished marksman badge. That man can shoot the wings off a fly at 1,000 yards. "Cooper already tried, sir, twice. So did Martinez, Kowalski, Reynolds, and every other qualified shooter within 40 miles. Chen pulled out his tablet, hands steady despite his racing pulse. Sir, if you'll just look at Morrison's qualification scores. I don't need to look at training scores. Hastings snatched the tablet anyway, his eyes scanning the data. Chen watched his expression shift from anger to confusion to something that might have been grudging surprise, but the colonel's jaw stayed tight. Training, Hastings said finally, setting the tablet down hard, is not combat. You understand that, Staff Sergeant. Those nice clean ranges with flags showing wind direction and spotters calling conditions. That's not the same as lying in the dirt with someone shooting back at you. I understand that, sir. Do you? Because right now, 3 of my soldiers are in medical with bullet wounds. We've got a sniper in those mountains who's making us look like a bunch of Boy Scouts. And your solution, he pointed an accusing finger at Chen, is to bring in some female sniper who's been with Special Ops for 8 months? 9 months, sir. Oh, 9 months. Well, that changes everything. Hastings's sarcasm could have stripped paint. Chen, I like you. You're a good soldier, smart, level-headed, which is why I'm having trouble understanding why you've lost your damn mind. Chen took a breath, choosing his words carefully. Sir, I watched that cave for 6 hours today. I calculated the range, the wind patterns, the elevation difference. That shot is at the absolute edge of what's possible with our equipment and training, maybe past it. So we call in an airstrike. Too many caves. He'll disappear and pop up somewhere else. And we can't keep calling in air support every time one sniper pins us down. Washington will have our heads. Hastings paced the tent, boots kicking up small clouds of dust. Outside, Chen could hear the evening prayer call from a distant village, the sound floating across the valley. What makes you think Morrison can make a shot that 15 of our best couldn't? Chen pulled up the training video on his tablet. Watch this, sir, please. The footage played in silence. Riley Morrison, looking almost delicate behind the massive TAC-50 rifle, the extreme distance to target, the impossible steadiness of her position. Then the shot, and 6 eternal seconds later the hit. 3,800 yards, Chen said quietly. Under wind conditions that had 3 other shooters in that training session give up. Sir, she didn't just hit the target. She hit center mass. Repeatedly. Hastings watched the video again, his jaw working. Anyone can get lucky in training. That's not luck, sir. That's mathematics. Chen pulled up Morrison's background file. Her father was a physics professor at MIT, specialized in ballistics and atmospheric dynamics. She grew up calculating bullet trajectories the way other kids played video games. Her mother was a Marine Corps sniper instructor at Quantico for 12 years. So she's got a good pedigree, doesn't mean. Sir, look at this. Chen scrolled to Morrison's written exam scores. Perfect score on the ballistics calculation test. Perfect. The next highest score in her class was 87%. She can calculate Coriolis effect, spin drift, and air density changes in her head faster than most people can use a computer. Hastings stared at the numbers. Something in his expression shifted, still resistant, but the certainty was cracking. Even if she's got the brain for it, that shot is over 2 miles, through a valley where the wind swirls like a tornado, uphill, under combat stress. Which is exactly why we need someone who can think through all those variables. Chen leaned forward, dropping military formality. Sir, Cooper's one of the best shooters I've ever seen, but he shoots on instinct and experience. This shot requires something else. It requires someone who can account for 30 different factors and trust the math even when it seems impossible. The colonel walked to the tent entrance, staring out at the mountains where the enemy waited. When he spoke, his voice was tired. You know what's going to happen if we bring her in and she fails. The men will lose confidence. Command will question my judgment. And that sniper will still be out there. Yes, sir. And you know what happens if she succeeds. Hastings turned back, his expression unreadable. Every old-school soldier in this man's army will have to admit they were wrong about women in combat, including me. You realize how many people will hate that? Chen met his eyes. Permission to speak freely, sir. At this point, why the hell not? I don't care who hates what. Rodriguez is 23 years old. He's got a baby girl named Emma who he's never held. Williams is so scared he can barely function. And tomorrow, that sniper is going to shoot someone else. Maybe kill them this time. Chen's voice hardened. Sir, if Morrison fails, at least we tried everything. But if we don't call her and someone dies and we could have prevented it, that's on us. The tent fell silent except for the hum of the portable generator outside. Hastings stared at Chen for a long moment, then at the casualty reports on his desk, then at the mountains beyond. God help us both, the colonel muttered. He grabbed the radio handset, paused, then keyed the mic. Fob Warrior, this is Colonel Hastings at Outpost Delta. I need immediate helicopter transport for Master Sergeant Riley Morrison. Priority Alpha. Authorization Hastings 77 Bravo. The response crackled back. Copy that, Colonel. Master Sergeant Morrison is mission ready. ETA 45 minutes. Hastings hung up the handset and looked at Chen with something between respect and regret. She better be as good as you say, Staff Sergeant, because if this goes sideways, it's your career in the fire. Chen nodded slowly. If it goes sideways, sir, we might not have careers left to worry about. Dismissed, and Chen, the colonel's voice stopped him at the tent flap. I hope to God you're right about her. So do I, sir, so do I. Chen walked out into the cooling evening air, his heart pounding. In 45 minutes, everything would change. The Black Hawk was already spinning up at Fob Warrior. Riley Morrison would be loading her gear, checking her rifle, preparing for a shot that had already defeated 15 of the military's best marksmen. He looked toward the mountains where the enemy sniper waited in his cave fortress, untouchable and patient. Not for much longer, Chen thought. Not if the math was right. The Black Hawk came in low and fast at 5:30 hours, rotors beating the air into submission, kicking up a dust storm that forced everyone to shield their eyes. Through the swirling brown cloud, a single figure emerged, small, compact, moving with economical precision. Riley Morrison stepped onto Afghan soil carrying two things: a custom rifle case almost as long as she was tall, and a worn tactical bag that had seen more countries than most tourists. At 5'6" and 135 pounds, with her blonde hair tied back in a regulation bun, she looked like she should be teaching elementary school, not preparing to make the most difficult shot in modern military history. Sergeant Cooper watched from the operations tent, arms crossed over his barrel chest. He'd been killing enemy combatants since Morrison was in high school. This is Chen's miracle solution. He shook his head. We're screwed. Beside him, Martinez lit a cigarette despite regulations. Maybe she's got a lucky rabbit's foot or something. Yeah, maybe she'll bat her eyelashes and the sniper will surrender, Cooper muttered. Several soldiers nearby laughed, nervous laughter that came from exhausted men who'd spent 2 days expecting a bullet with their name on it. Morrison heard it. She always heard it. 6 years in the military had given her ears like a radar array for skepticism, condescension, and the particular brand of doubt reserved for women in combat roles. But her face showed nothing, smooth, professional, focused. She'd learned the hard way that defending yourself to doubters was like arguing with a brick wall, pointless and exhausting. The rifle would speak for her. It always had. Staff Sergeant Chen met her at the landing zone, relief evident in his eyes. Master Sergeant Morrison, thank you for coming. Staff Sergeant, she nodded, all business. Her green eyes were already scanning the mountains, calculating, assessing. Show me where he is. No pleasantries, no small talk. Chen liked that. He led her to the operations tent where topographical maps covered every surface and exhausted soldiers sprawled in whatever shade they could find. The temperature was already climbing toward 110 degrees. Inside the tent, a dozen faces turned to stare. Morrison felt their eyes like physical weight, evaluating, judging, dismissing. She set her rifle case down carefully, then moved to the main map table. "Master Sergeant Morrison," Chen began, "these are." "Tell me about every miss." Morrison cut him off, not rudely but with the urgency of someone who knew time was a luxury they didn't have. "Every shot that's been taken at that cave. I need to know the time, the conditions, the shooter, and where the bullet impacted." Chen blinked, then started walking her through the attempts. Cooper's first shot at 900 yesterday, wind southwest at 6 knots. Bullet fell short by approximately 200 yards, Morrison finished, not looking up from the map. "Your shot. I recognize the conservative elevation calculation." Chen stared at her. "How did you?" "You're trained on the M110. Effective range 800 meters, theoretical maximum about 1,400. You know the weapon's limitations, so you played it safe on the ballistics." She looked up at him. "Smart call for that rifle. Wrong weapon for this job. Continue." For 20 minutes, Chen detailed all 15 attempts. Morrison listened with an intensity that made some soldiers uncomfortable, like she was processing data at computer speed. Occasionally, she jotted notes in a battered green notebook covered with equations and coffee stains. Then she stopped him. "Wait, Martinez's shot at 1400 hours. You said the wind was southwest at 8 miles per hour." "Yeah, that's right." Her eyes lit up, the first real emotion she'd shown. But Kowalski's attempt at 1600 was a northeast wind. Martinez leaned forward from where he'd been slouching against a support beam. "How the hell would you know that?" Morrison grabbed a pencil and began sketching rapid lines on a notepad, vectors, arrows, swirling patterns that looked like abstract art. "The valley. Look at the topography. You've got a natural wind tunnel here compressed between these two ridges, but at the northern end," she tapped the map, "it opens up, creating a vortex effect. The wind doesn't just blow, it rotates." Chen felt his scalp prickle. "A rotating column of air." "Exactly, which means you're not shooting through consistent conditions. You're shooting through wind that's literally changing direction along the bullet's path." She looked around the tent. "Did anyone account for that?" Silence. Cooper pushed off the tent wall, his voice edged with irritation. "We accounted for wind speed and direction at our position, like we always do." "Which works at normal combat ranges," Morrison said, her tone matter-of-fact, not condescending. "But at 4,200 yards, your bullet is in the air for nearly 6 seconds. 6 seconds is enough time for that wind vortex to complete a quarter rotation. So the wind that's blowing left at the beginning of your bullet's flight might be blowing right by the time it reaches the target." "That's," Specialist Davis trailed off, his mind clearly blown. "Impossible to calculate," Morrison finished. "No, just really, really hard." She turned back to the map. "What else? Temperature differentials between here and there, altitude variance, time of day for each shot." Chen started rattling off more data. Morrison absorbed it all, her pencil moving in sharp, precise strokes. Some soldiers drifted away, losing interest. Others stayed, fascinated despite themselves by this small woman who talked about bullet physics like she was discussing the weather. Cooper, however, had heard enough. He stepped forward, his 6'2" frame towering over Morrison's smaller stature. "Look, lady, I've been shooting since you were in diapers. I've got 47 confirmed kills. I've made shots in Iraq, Afghanistan, and places that don't exist on maps, and you're standing here telling me I don't know how to read wind." Morrison stopped writing. She looked up at Cooper, her green eyes steady and cold as ice. The tent went very quiet. "Sergeant Cooper," she said calmly, "I've read your file. You're an exceptional marksman. Your instincts are probably better than my calculations on 90% of shots." She paused. "But this isn't a 90% shot. This is a shot that requires accounting for the Coriolis effect, spin drift over extreme distance, air density changes with altitude, temperature-induced mirage effects, and a rotating wind pattern that changes by the second. She held up her notebook, covered in equations. I'm not better than you because I'm smarter or more talented. I'm better at this specific shot because I've spent my entire life learning to calculate what you feel instinctively. And at this distance, instinct isn't enough. The physics matter. Cooper's jaw clenched. Math doesn't win gunfights. Neither does ego, Sergeant. Morrison's voice didn't rise, but something in her tone made it cut deeper than a shout. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have work to do. You're welcome to watch, or you're welcome to keep doubting. Either way, in about 6 hours, we'll know if the math works. She turned her back on him, a dismissal more complete than any words, and walked out of the tent into the blazing morning sun. The tent erupted in murmurs. Cooper stood frozen, fists clenched, his face red. Chen watched Morrison's small figure heading toward the observation post, rifle case in hand. Martinez whistled low. Well, damn. She's got guts, I'll give her that, muttered Reynolds. Cooper grabbed his own rifle. Guts don't mean shit if she can't make the shot. I'm gonna watch this train wreck up close. Chen followed Morrison out, catching up to her at the observation point. Master Sergeant, you didn't have to. Yes, I did. She set down her gear and pulled out a range finder. Staff Sergeant Chen, I've been doubted my entire career. By instructors, by fellow soldiers, by commanding officers who thought I was a political checkbox. If I stopped to defend myself every time, I'd never get anything done. She raised the range finder to her eyes, studying the distant cave. The only thing that shuts people up is results, so let's get me some results. Chen watched her work, this woman half the size of Cooper with twice his burden of proof, and thought, God help that sniper in the cave. Because Riley, Morrison hadn't come here to prove herself to the doubters. She'd come here to do a job. And Chen had a feeling she was very, very good at her job. While other soldiers slept in shifts or gathered in the shade complaining about the heat, Riley Morrison worked. At 600 hours, she was climbing to the first observation point, a rocky outcrop on the eastern side of the outpost. At 7:30, she was on the western ridge. By 900, she'd been to 4 different positions, and each time she did the same thing, stood perfectly still, eyes closed, feeling the wind on her face. Corporal Jackson, assigned as her spotter, followed her like a confused puppy. Master Sergeant, what exactly are you doing? Learning how the air moves. Morrison didn't open her eyes. Wind isn't uniform. It has texture, rhythm, personality. This valley has its own signature. Jackson glanced back at the other soldiers who were watching from various positions. Some looked curious. Most looked skeptical. Cooper sat cleaning his rifle with exaggerated disinterest, but his eyes kept flicking their direction. How can wind have a personality? Jackson asked. Morrison finally opened her eyes and pulled out a small notebook, not the one with ballistics equations, but a weather log. She showed him pages of data from her previous missions. Afghanistan, March 2024, wind came in 12-minute cycles. Iraq, September 2023, 8-minute cycles. Germany training range, May 2023, 15-minute cycles with a microburst every third rotation. She looked at the mountains. Every place has a pattern. I just need to find this one's rhythm. At 1,000 hours, Morrison was lying flat on her belly on a sun-scorched rock, watching dust devils form and dissipate in the valley below. She had 3 different wind meters set up at various positions, and she checked each one every 10 minutes, recording the data in columns that looked like sheet music, numbers creating a symphony only she could hear. This is insane, Martinez whispered to Reynolds, both of them watching from a distance. She's been staring at dirt for 2 hours. Maybe she's praying, Reynolds suggested. Maybe she's stalling because she knows she can't make the shot. But Chen, watching through binoculars, saw something different. He saw Morrison's eyes tracking invisible currents, her pencil moving in precise calculations. She wasn't stalling. She was hunting, not the sniper but the wind itself. By 1100 hours, the sun was a hammer, and the rocks were radiating heat like ovens. Most soldiers had retreated to whatever shade existed. Morrison stayed in the sun, now studying topographical maps and making notations that covered the margins in tiny, precise handwriting. Jackson, sweating through his uniform, couldn't help asking, "Master Sergeant, you're accounting for what exactly?" Morrison didn't look up from her calculations. Currently, the Coriolis effect. The Earth rotates at about 1,000 miles per hour at the equator, slower at our latitude, but still fast enough that over 4,200 yards and 6 seconds of flight time, my bullet will drift right by about 2 feet just because the planet is spinning underneath it. You're accounting for the Earth's rotation. Jackson's voice cracked with disbelief. Have to. Then there's spin drift. The bullet rotates clockwise as it flies, which creates a lateral force pushing it right. At this distance, that's another 1.5 feet. She scribbled more numbers. Air density drops as we shoot uphill. Lower density means less drag but also less predictable wind effect. Temperature here is 108 degrees, probably 95 at the cave elevation. That's a 13-degree differential affecting air density along the bullet path. Jackson stared at her notebook, which was filling with equations that looked like advanced calculus. How many variables are you calculating? Morrison paused, mentally counting. So far, 37, but I'm missing something. She looked at the distant cave, frustration flickering across her professional mask. The bullet drop should be about 38 feet at this range, accounting for gravity and the upward angle. Wind drift should be manageable if it were consistent, but with that rotating valley wind. She trailed off, eyes distant, mind clearly running simulations. At 1200 hours, soldiers started placing bets. The going odds were 3-1 against Morrison making the shot. Cooper, notably, bet $100 she'd miss. Chen didn't bet. He just watched Morrison work with the dedication of a monk in meditation. At 12:30, something changed. Morrison had been watching a small Afghan flag on a partially destroyed building about a mile away, closer than the cave but still in the valley. The flag had been whipping erratically in the wind, snapping left, then right, then going slack. But Morrison noticed something. She pulled out her phone, set a timer, and watched. The flag snapped left, held for 20 seconds, went slack for about 40 seconds, then snapped right. She watched for another cycle. Same pattern. Another cycle. The pattern held. "Jackson," she said suddenly, her voice sharp with excitement. "Wind meter now." He scrambled for the device. Southwest 9 knots, gusting to 13. Morrison checked her watch, waited exactly 12 minutes, then, check again. Northwest 7 knots, gusting to 11. Again 12 minutes. Jackson waited, checked. Southwest again, 8 knots, gusting to 12. His eyes widened. It's rotating. The wind is actually rotating. On a 12-minute cycle, Morrison was already calculating furiously. And in the middle of each rotation, there's a window, about 40 seconds, where the wind nearly stops as it transitions direction. The valley catches its breath. She pulled out her range finder and checked the cave again, then looked at her watch. Next window is in 7 minutes. She turned to Jackson, her face transformed, no longer the quiet professional but a hunter who'd finally found her prey's weakness. "Get everyone ready, and Jackson, tell the medics to stand by." "Stand by for what?" "For when I take this shot and that sniper sees my muzzle flash. If my calculations are wrong by even a fraction, he'll shoot back, and he won't miss." Jackson's face went pale. "Master Sergeant, if you're not sure." "I'm not sure," Morrison interrupted. "I won't be sure until I pull the trigger. That's why it's called a calculated risk, Corporal. Now get moving. We have 6 minutes." As Jackson ran to alert Chen, Morrison began setting up her rifle on the rocky outcrop. She'd spent 6 hours learning this valley's secrets, filling 3 notebook pages with observations that most snipers wouldn't consider in a lifetime. She'd accounted for the rotation of the Earth, the spin of her bullet, the temperature of the air, and the personality of the wind. But there was one variable she couldn't calculate: herself, her nerves, her doubt, the pressure of 15 failed attempts before her and 32 soldiers depending on her success. She chambered a single .50 caliber round, 750 grains of copper-jacketed lead, and settled into position. Through her scope, the cave was a dark smudge at an impossible distance. No human eye could see a man at that range, but the scope brought it close enough that she could just make out the darkness where an enemy waited, confident in his untouchable fortress. 4 minutes, Jackson said, his voice tight. Morrison's hands were steady, but her heart hammered. 6 hours of preparation, 6 seconds of flight time, one chance to prove that mathematics could defeat distance, that patience could overcome doubt, and that sometimes the person everyone underestimates is exactly who you need. She closed her eyes and felt the wind on her face. Southwest still gusting. 3 minutes. Morrison opened her eyes and checked the flag, still snapping in the wind, but the snaps were getting weaker, shorter. The cycle was beginning its transition. Behind her, she heard boots on rock. Chen had arrived with half the outpost, soldiers who'd mocked her that morning now gathering to watch, to see if the math worked, to see if she was as good as her training scores suggested, or to watch her fail spectacularly. Cooper was there too, rifle in hand, eyes hidden behind sunglasses, watching, judging, waiting for her to prove him right about women in combat roles. 2 minutes. The flag snapping grew weaker still. Morrison did one final calculation in her head, 37 variables flowing together like a symphony reaching its crescendo. Elevation, windage, Coriolis, spin drift, air density, temperature, the Earth's rotation, the bullet's arc through space and time. And faith that 6 hours of observation would pay off in 6 seconds of flight. 1 minute, wind is dropping, Master Sergeant, it's dropping. The flag went nearly still, just a lazy flutter, the valley holding its breath. Morrison settled deeper into her position, her cheek pressed against the rifle stock, her finger moving to the trigger. Through her scope, she saw movement in the distant cave. The enemy sniper, finally showing himself, confident that no one could touch him at this range. Window opening. Now the world narrowed to a single point of focus. Through her scope, Riley Morrison could see the distant cave entrance, a dark mouth carved into gray rock 4,187 yards away. At 40x magnification, the tiny silhouette of a man was just barely visible, a shadow moving in darkness. The enemy sniper, checking his rifle, adjusting his position, completely unaware that death was calculating his coordinates. Morrison's breathing slowed, 4 breaths per minute. Her heart rate dropped, 60 beats per minute, then 55, then 50. A physiological response she'd trained for years to achieve. In this state between heartbeats, she could feel the earth rotating beneath her. "Wind check," she said, her voice barely a whisper. Jackson pressed against his spotting scope, his hands trembling slightly. "Southwest 4 knots, gusts are, they're gone. Master Sergeant, the valley's gone still." 37 variables, all of them flowing through Morrison's mind like a river of numbers. Elevation, 38 feet up to compensate for bullet drop and upward angle. Windage, 15 feet right for the base calculation, but adjusted to 12 feet because the valley wind was in transition. Coriolis effect, 2.3 feet right because the earth would spin beneath her bullet for 6 seconds. Spin drift, 1.7 feet right from the bullet's clockwise rotation. Temperature differential. Air would be cooler at target elevation, slightly denser, affecting the bullet's path by perhaps 8 inches. Barometric pressure, 29.87 and dropping, which meant 30 seconds, Jackson breathed. Behind Morrison, 30 soldiers watched in absolute silence. Chen stood with binoculars pressed to his eyes, barely breathing. Cooper had his own spotting scope trained on the cave, his jaw clenched tight. Martinez's cigarette burned forgotten between his fingers. Even the soldiers who'd bet against her wanted her to succeed, because success meant the sniper who'd terrorized them for 2 days would be gone. Morrison made one final micro-adjustment to her scope. Her finger moved to the trigger, a 2-stage trigger with a 5-pound pull. She'd take up the first stage now, let the rifle settle, then the final pressure would come between heartbeats. Through the scope, the enemy sniper stepped fully into view. He was adjusting something on his rifle, probably checking the scope, maybe even looking toward their position. Confident, untouchable, 2.5 miles was an impossible distance. Everyone knew it. Everyone except Riley Morrison. "Wind holding," Jackson whispered. "Flag's almost still. You've got maybe 30 seconds before the cycle shifts." Morrison felt everything, the rock beneath her body radiating heat, the rifle's weight familiar as her own bones, the trigger under her finger that precise point of mechanical resistance, the wind's whisper dying to nothing, the Earth's rotation, imperceptible but real, spinning at 800 miles per hour at this latitude. She exhaled halfway and held it. Her finger took up the first trigger stage. The rifle settled into the natural pause between her heartbeats. The entire outpost held its breath. Morrison squeezed. The TAC-50 roared like a cannon, the massive .50 caliber round exploding from the barrel at 2,800 feet per second. The recoil slammed into Morrison's shoulder with 97 foot-pounds of energy, but she didn't flinch. Through her scope, she was already tracking the bullet's invisible path, her mind running calculations even as the shot flew. 1 second. The bullet screamed through air, supersonic, creating a shock wave that rippled the heat mirages. At 2,800 feet per second, it was traveling faster than most commercial airplanes. But gravity was already pulling it down, the Earth's rotation was pushing it right, and wind resistance was bleeding away its velocity with every yard. Chen's binoculars never wavered from the cave. "Come on," he whispered. "Come on." 2 seconds. The bullet crossed the halfway point, dropping 15 feet from its bore line, drifting 8 feet right. Morrison's calculations had accounted for this. The bullet was exactly where it needed to be, for now. But it was slowing, dropping from supersonic to subsonic, the trajectory becoming less predictable. Cooper watched through his scope, his expression unreadable. Part of him wanted her to miss, wanted proof that experience beat education, that instinct trumped mathematics. But another part, the soldier who'd lost friends to enemy snipers, wanted that cave to go silent forever. 3 seconds. The bullet entered the valley's dead zone, the rotating wind tunnel that had defeated 15 previous attempts. But Morrison had timed it perfectly. The wind was in transition, the 40-second window of relative calm. The bullet flew through air that was almost still, maintaining its calculated path. "I don't see impact," Jackson said, his voice tight with stress. "Still in flight." 4 seconds. The bullet climbed the far side of the valley, fighting the upward angle, gravity pulling harder now. It had dropped 28 feet and drifted 11 feet right, exactly as Morrison had calculated. The Coriolis effect was becoming more pronounced, the Earth literally spinning beneath the bullet's path. Martinez couldn't watch. His eyes were closed, hands clasped like he was praying. 5 seconds. The bullet reached its terminal phase, now subsonic, velocity bleeding away. But it still carried enough kinetic energy to punch through body armor at close range. Through the scope, Chen could see the enemy sniper still standing in the cave entrance, completely unaware that death had been traveling toward him for an eternity. "Jesus Christ, how long does it take?" someone muttered. 6 seconds. Through his binoculars, Chen saw the impossible. The distant figure, just a tiny silhouette against darkness, jerked violently backward, arms flying up, rifle clattering. The man crumpled and disappeared into the cave's darkness. Hit, Chen's voice cracked with disbelief. That's a hit, she got him, she got HIM. The outpost exploded. Soldiers erupted in screams, jumping, throwing helmets in the air. Jackson grabbed Morrison in a bear hug that lifted her off the ground, shouting incoherently. Men who'd never spoken to her were slapping her back, shaking her hand, voices overlapping in a chaos of celebration. No way, no way. Did you see that? 4,000 yards, 4,000 yards. Morrison calmly unloaded her rifle, hands shaking just slightly, the only sign of the immense pressure she'd been under. She set the weapon down carefully, then allowed herself a small smile. Cooper stood frozen, his spotting scope still trained on the cave. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. No way, he kept repeating. No way, no way. Martinez dropped to his knees, laughing hysterically. She did it. The math actually worked. Chen ran over, his face split in the biggest grin Morrison had ever seen. Morrison, that was. How did you? Math Staff Sergeant. Her voice was steady despite her pounding heart, and a little bit of faith. But Jackson's voice cut through the celebration. Wait, contact, I've got movement in the cave. Every soldier froze. Weapons came up. Had she missed? Was the sniper still alive? Through the spotting scopes, they watched as two more figures emerged from the cave system, insurgents who'd been hiding deeper inside. They bent down, grabbed their fallen comrade by the arms, and dragged his body back into the darkness. One of them paused, looking across the impossible distance toward the American position. Then they vanished into the cave and didn't come back. The radio on Chen's hip crackled. Outpost Delta, this is Overwatch. We saw your shot. Confirm target down. Chen grabbed the radio, his voice shaking with adrenaline and relief. Confirmed. Target neutralized. Master Sergeant Morrison just made a 4,187-yard kill shot. Static then. Say again. Did you say 4,000 yards? Affirmative. 4,187 yards. A long pause. We're sending ballistics. Stand by. Morrison sat down on the rock, suddenly exhausted. 6 hours of preparation. 6 seconds of flight. One impossible shot that had just rewritten the record books. Cooper walked over slowly. He stood there for a moment, then extended his hand. Master Sergeant, that was the best shot I've ever seen, from anyone. Morrison shook his hand, seeing the genuine respect in his eyes. Thank you, Sergeant. I'm sorry for earlier, for doubting. She smiled slightly. Don't be, doubt makes us better. It made me check my math 3 times. The celebration continued around them, but Morrison just sat quietly, looking at the distant mountains where an enemy sniper would never shoot again. 37 variables, 6 seconds, 1 perfect shot. The math had worked. Within 90 minutes, 3 helicopters descended on Outpost Delta. The first carried ballistics experts from Bagram Air Base. The second brought 2 generals who needed to see this in person. The third held a CNN-embedded journalist who'd been monitoring military radio chatter and heard the words, 4,000-yard kill shot. Master Chief Ballistics Analyst Patterson was the first to reach Morrison. He was a grizzled former Marine with 30 years of analyzing bullet trajectories, a man who documented some of the longest shots in military history. His face was skeptical as he approached. He'd heard impossible claims before. Master Sergeant Morrison, his handshake was firm, testing. I need to see your data. Morrison handed over her notebook without a word. 3 pages of dense calculations, wind observations, and equations that looked like they belonged in a physics textbook. Patterson studied them in silence, his eyes widening with each line. You calculated for Coriolis effect. His voice was quiet, almost reverential. Yes, sir. and the valley wind rotation pattern. 12-minute cycle, with a 40-second calm window during transition. Patterson looked up at her, then back at the notebook. He pulled out his own calculator, running her numbers. His hands moved faster, checking, rechecking. Finally, he looked at Chen. "Staff Sergeant, I need to verify the distance. Laser range finder now." Chen already had it ready. Patterson aimed at the cave, calibrated, aimed again. 4,187 yards, he breathed. Jesus Christ, that's 2.38 miles, uphill, through a rotating wind pattern. He turned back to Morrison. "And you're telling me you accounted for all of this?" 37 variables, sir." Morrison's voice was steady, but Chen noticed her hands were still shaking slightly. The adrenaline crash was hitting. 37. Patterson sat down on a rock, still clutching her notebook like it was the Dead Sea Scrolls. "Master Sergeant, I've been doing ballistics analysis since before you were born. This," he tapped the notebook, "this is PhD-level calculation done in field conditions under threat of death. How long did you have to prepare?" 6 hours, sir." 6 hours. Patterson laughed, but it was laughter born of disbelief, not mockery. "Most snipers couldn't make these calculations with a computer in a week. You did it with a pencil and a notebook in 6 hours." Morrison shrugged slightly. "My father was a physicist. He taught me to see the world in equations. My mother was a sniper. She taught me how to apply them." "Well, your parents created something remarkable." Patterson stood up, his professional demeanor returning. "I need to document everything. The exact position of your shot, wind conditions, temperature, all of it. This is going into the record books. This might be the most difficult shot ever made under combat conditions." "Second longest confirmed kill, sir," Morrison corrected quietly. "Canadian Corporal Rob Furlong still holds the record at 2,657 yards. In terms of pure distance, yes, but his shot was on flat ground in consistent wind." Patterson gestured at the valley. "You shot uphill, through a rotating wind pattern, accounting for variables that most snipers don't even know exist. Master Sergeant, in terms of technical difficulty, this might be the most impressive shot in military history." Morrison didn't respond. She was staring at the distant cave, her expression unreadable. 2 hours later, after the generals had shaken her hand and the ballistics team had documented every detail, Morrison sat alone behind the operations tent. The celebration had finally died down. Soldiers were returning to their posts, to their routines, the adrenaline high fading into exhaustion. She pulled out her phone. They had sporadic satellite signal, and stared at the screen. Her father's number, her mother's number. She should call them, tell them, but her thumb hovered without pressing. "Master Sergeant." Morrison looked up. Lieutenant Rodriguez stood there, his arm in a sling, his face pale but smiling. "I heard what you did. I wanted to say thank you." "You should be resting, Lieutenant." "I couldn't rest without thanking the person who stopped that bastard." Rodriguez sat down carefully, wincing at the movement. "That sniper, he shot me while I was reaching for water, just random, like I was nothing. I kept thinking, what if he'd aimed 6 inches lower? What if Emma grows up without a father because I got thirsty?" His voice cracked slightly. Morrison looked at him, really looked at him. 23 years old, baby face, wedding ring on his finger, someone's husband, someone's father. Alive because of mathematics and a bullet that flew for 6 seconds. "Your daughter's name is Emma?" Morrison asked quietly. "Yeah, born 3 months ago. I've got a picture." He fumbled for his phone with his good hand, pulled up a photo. A tiny baby with a pink hat, eyes squeezed shut, perfect. Morrison stared at the photo for a long moment. "She's beautiful. I'm going to tell her about you someday, about the woman who saved her daddy's life with the impossible shot." Rodriguez smiled. "She probably won't believe me. I barely believe it myself." "It wasn't impossible," Morrison said softly. "Just really, really difficult." After Rodriguez left, Morrison sat in the fading light thinking about Emma, about all the Emmas, daughters, sons, wives, husbands, parents, who get to see their loved ones come home because of what happened today. She joined the military to serve, to protect, to make a difference. But it was abstract until moments like this, until you saw the face of a baby who'd grow up with a father. Her phone buzzed. A text from Chen, media wants interviews. CNN, Fox, ABC, everyone. What should I tell them? Morrison typed back, tell them no. All of them. All of them. She wasn't interested in being a symbol or a story. She wasn't interested in recruitment posters or talk show appearances. She'd done her job. That was enough. But Chen's next text made her pause. Morrison, you just proved something a lot of people said was impossible. Not just the shot. The whole thing. Women in combat, you in special ops. This matters beyond just today. Morrison stared at the message, then at the mountains, then back at her phone. She thought about Cooper's skepticism that morning, about the whispers she'd heard for 6 years, about every instructor who'd pushed her harder, expecting her to fail, about every soldier who'd assumed she was a diversity hire rather than the best person for the job. She typed, I didn't make this shot to prove women belong in combat. I made it because a sniper was killing soldiers and someone needed to stop him. Chen's response was immediate. I know, but you proved it anyway. As the sun set over the Afghan mountains, painting them in shades of orange and red, Morrison cleaned her rifle with methodical precision. The TAC-50 that had sent a bullet 4,187 yards into history. She ran the cleaning rod through the barrel, feeling the familiar rhythm of the task. Hey, Cooper's voice. Morrison looked up. The big sergeant stood there awkwardly, holding 2 MRE pouches. Thought you might be hungry. You haven't eaten all day. Thank you, Sergeant. Cooper sat down, maintaining a respectful distance. They ate in silence for a moment, then he spoke. My daughter starts basic training next month. First woman in my family to join the military. He paused. I've been worried, wondering if she could handle it, if they'd take her seriously, if. He trailed off, but Morrison understood what he wasn't saying. Your daughter will be fine, Morrison said. If she's anything like her father, she'll be an excellent soldier. Yeah, but she's not like me. She's like you, smart, calculated, thinks 3 steps ahead. Cooper looked at her directly. I'm going to tell her about today, about how the smartest person in the outpost saved all our asses. I think she needs to hear that. Morrison nodded slowly. Tell her something else, too. What's that? Tell her that doubt is fuel. Every person who didn't believe in me made me check my math one more time, made me prepare better, made me more ready. She smiled slightly. Tell her to let the doubters make her better, not bitter. Cooper extended his fist. Morrison bumped it. As he walked away, Morrison looked at the stars beginning to emerge in the darkening sky. Somewhere up there, satellites were already transmitting the story. Master Sergeant Riley Morrison, 4,187-yard confirmed kill, the shot heard round the world. But here, now, all that mattered was that the shooting had stopped. The math had worked. And Emma would know her father. The media firestorm hit 72 hours later, and it hit like an avalanche. Female sniper, MAKES, impossible shot. 4,187 yards under fire. Woman warrior saves platoon with historic kill. The math major who became a military legend. Master Sergeant Riley Morrison, rewriting the rules of modern warfare. Morrison's face appeared on CNN, Fox News, MSNBC, military blogs, and social media feeds across the globe. Footage from the outpost, grainy, shot on someone's phone, showed her lying prone with her rifle, the moment of the shot, the celebration afterward. It went viral, 10 million views in 3 days, then 20 million, then 50. Her phone wouldn't stop ringing. The Pentagon wanted her for a press conference. Talk shows offered 5-figure appearance fees. A book publisher called with a six-figure advance. Hollywood producers inquired about film rights. Even a video game company wanted to create a character based on her. Morrison declined everything. She sat in a small room at Bagram Air Base, staring at the pile of interview requests Chen had printed out, and felt a deep exhaustion that had nothing to do with the Afghan heat. "I'm not doing this," she said flatly. Master Sergeant with respect, the Pentagon liaison, a polished major named Hendricks, tried his diplomatic best. "This is an incredible recruitment opportunity. Young women across America are inspired by what you did. We could." "No," Morrison stood up, her 5'6" frame somehow filling the room. "I'm not a recruiting poster. I'm not a symbol. I'm a soldier who did her job, that's it." "But you're more than that now," Hendricks pressed. "Whether you like it or not, you've become a role model. You've proven that women can." "I haven't proven anything about women," Morrison cut him off, her voice sharp. "I proved that proper training, calculation, and preparation can overcome extreme distance. That's a lesson for every soldier, regardless of gender. I'm not interested in being tokenized or turned into a political statement for either side of any debate." Hendricks tried a different approach. "What about the young women who are watching, who see themselves in you?" Morrison's expression softened slightly. She thought about Cooper's daughter starting basic training, about the emails that had somehow found their way to her, dozens of them from teenage girls who suddenly thought they could be snipers, could be soldiers, could be more than what people told them they could be. "Tell them," Morrison said slowly, "that I didn't make that shot because I'm a woman. I made it because I spent 6 hours preparing, 6 years training, and my entire life learning to turn physics into results. Tell them that gender didn't pull that trigger, competence did. And if they want to follow in my footsteps, they should focus on becoming competent, not on becoming symbols." She walked out, leaving Hendricks with a stack of declined interview requests. But Morrison couldn't stop what her shot had started. The military culture shifted, subtly but undeniably. Women who'd been quietly enduring doubt and discrimination suddenly found commanders more willing to listen. Training programs that had been hesitant to push female candidates as hard as male candidates started demanding equal excellence from everyone. The phrase "for a woman" began disappearing from performance evaluations. It wasn't revolution, it was evolution. One impossible shot creating ripples that spread farther than the bullet itself. 6 months after Afghanistan, Master Sergeant Riley Morrison stood in front of 40 sniper candidates at Fort Benning, Georgia. The Advanced Sniper Training Course, the most elite marksmanship program in the U.S. military. She'd been strongly encouraged to accept the instructor position, which in military terms meant it wasn't really optional. She looked at the class, 22 men, 18 women, the highest percentage of female candidates the program had ever seen. They stared at her with a mixture of awe and nervousness. Some had probably seen the viral video 100 times. "That shot in Afghanistan," Morrison began, packing in front of the assembled soldiers. "Everyone wants to know the secret. Was it luck? Divine intervention? Some kind of genetic gift that makes women better at math?" She paused, meeting their eyes. "It was none of those things. It was preparation meeting opportunity." She pulled out her weathered notebook, now preserved in a protective case, the equations still visible through the plastic. "But here's what the news stories don't tell you, what the viral videos don't show. I was terrified. I doubted myself 100 times that morning. And if any one of my 37 variables had been wrong, if I'd miscalculated the wind rotation by 30 seconds, if I'd forgotten to account for the temperature differential, if I'd rushed the shot instead of waiting for the perfect window, I would have failed." A young woman in the front row, Private Chen, no relation to the staff sergeant, raised her hand tentatively. "Master Sergeant, how did you trust yourself enough to take the shot?" Morrison smiled, recognizing herself in that question. "I didn't trust myself, Private. Not entirely. I trusted the science. I trusted the mathematics. I trusted that I'd done the work to be ready. She looked at each candidate individually. And that's what separates adequate snipers from exceptional ones. Not confidence, not fearlessness, but the intellectual honesty to know what you don't know and the discipline to prepare so thoroughly that when the critical moment arrives, you're ready for it. She turned to the whiteboard and began writing equations. Now, let's talk about something that 90% of snipers ignore and 100% should understand. The Coriolis effect and why the Earth's rotation wants to ruin your shot. For the next 3 hours, Morrison taught. Not just the math, but the mindset. Not just the technique, but the temperament. She showed them her wind journals from a dozen different locations. She made them calculate bullet trajectories by hand before letting them use computers. She taught them to feel the air, to read the landscape, to understand that every environment had its own signature. Private Chen approached her after class, nervous but determined. "Master Sergeant, can I ask you something personal?" "Go ahead, Private." "Did it bother you, all the doubt, people saying you couldn't do it because you're a woman?" Morrison was quiet for a moment, remembering Cooper's skepticism, the whispers, the years of having to be twice as good to be considered half as capable. "Yes," she said honestly, "it bothered me every single day, still does sometimes." "So how did you deal with it?" "I made it useful." Morrison gestured to her notebook. "Every time someone doubted me, I used it as motivation to check my math one more time, to train one more hour, to be so undeniably prepared that the results would speak louder than the skepticism." She looked at Chen directly. "Doubt is fuel, Private. You can let it poison you or you can let it push you to be better. Your choice." Chen nodded slowly, something shifting in her expression, fear transforming into determination. That night, Morrison sat in her quarters, finally reading through the stack of emails that had accumulated. Most were from young women, some in the military, most not, who'd been inspired by the shot. But one email stood out, from an Army Ranger named Marcus Chen. "Master Sergeant Morrison, you probably don't remember, but I was the staff sergeant who called you to Outpost Delta. I wanted you to know that Rodriguez made it home safely. He's out of the Army now, working as a teacher, raising Emma. He showed me a picture last week. She's walking now, getting into everything. She exists because you made an impossible shot. But I also wanted to tell you about Private Williams. Remember him? The scared kid who thought he was going to die. He just graduated from Ranger School, top of his class. He told me that watching you work that day, the patience, the preparation, the absolute refusal to take the shot until you knew it was right, taught him more about being a soldier than anything else in his career. You didn't just save lives that day, Master Sergeant. You changed them." "Thank you." Morrison stared at the email for a long time, then looked at a photo on her desk. Emma, now 9 months old, smiling at the camera, completely unaware that she'd almost grown up without a father. Completely unaware that mathematics and a bullet and 6 seconds of flight time had altered her entire future. This was why the shot mattered. Not the record books, not the viral videos, not the political debates about women in combat. This, a baby who'd know her father, a scared soldier who found courage, a next generation learning that impossible just meant you hadn't done the math yet. Morrison closed her laptop and looked out at the Fort Benning training grounds, where tomorrow she'd teach 40 more soldiers to turn physics into precision. The legend was just beginning. But the teacher, she was already changing the world. 3 years after the shot heard round the world, the advanced sniper training course at Fort Benning had become something of a pilgrimage site. Students came from allied nations, British SAS, Canadian Special Forces, Australian Commandos, all wanting to train under the woman who'd made the impossible possible. Master Sergeant Riley Morrison, now 32, stood on the observation deck watching her current class of 43 students work through a long-range scenario. The standards hadn't changed since she'd arrived. If anything, they'd gotten harder. She demanded excellence from everyone equally, No special treatment, no lowered bars, no excuses. Master Sergeant, her assistant instructor, now Sergeant First Class Jackson, the same Jackson who'd spotted for her in Afghanistan, approached with a tablet. "You need to see this. Range 7, Corporal Martinez." Morrison raised her binoculars. At range 7, a small figure lay prone behind a Barrett M82. Corporal Sarah Martinez, no relation to the Martinez from Outpost Delta, had been with the program for 6 months. Quiet, methodical, brilliant with calculations but struggling with confidence. "What's the distance?" Morrison asked. 4,215 yards, Master Sergeant." Jackson's voice carried barely suppressed excitement. "She's been out there for 7 hours, calculated everything 3 times. The wind window opens in 2 minutes." Morrison felt her heart rate increase slightly. 4,215 yards, 33 yards farther than her shot in Afghanistan. A new record if Martinez could make it. "Has she asked for help?" "Negative," she said, and I quote, "Master Sergeant Morrison taught me that doubt is fuel. I'm using it." Morrison smiled despite herself. She'd said those exact words 100 times in classes, but hearing them repeated back, actually applied, that was something different. She watched through binoculars as Martinez went through her final preparations. The young corporal was doing everything right, checking wind meters at multiple positions, studying the heat mirages, waiting for the precise moment when all variables aligned. "Wind window opening," Jackson reported. "Now." The Barrett roared. Through the binoculars, Morrison tracked the invisible bullet's path, her mind automatically calculating. Flight time approximately 6.2 seconds at this distance, bullet drop close to 41 feet, Coriolis drift of 2.7 feet. 6 seconds stretched into eternity. Then the target board, a tiny speck at 2.4 miles, pinged audibly over the range speakers. "Direct hit, center mass." The observation deck erupted in cheers. Students who'd been watching rushed toward range 7. Jackson grabbed the radio. "Range control, confirmed target impact at 4,215 yards. New training record." Morrison walked calmly down to range 7, arriving as Martinez was unloading her rifle. The young corporal's hands shook, adrenaline and relief flooding her system. She looked up as Morrison approached, eyes wide. "Master Sergeant, I." Morrison extended her hand. "Outstanding work, Corporal. You just set a new record." Martinez shook her hand, tears suddenly streaming down her face. "I almost quit. 3 times this morning I almost quit. The math looked impossible, the wind was rotating, and I kept thinking, who am I to try this?" "But you didn't quit," Morrison said quietly. "You used the doubt. You checked your math 3 times. You waited for the right moment. That's not luck, Corporal, that's excellence." "You taught me that," Martinez said, her voice cracking. "Everything you said about preparation, about trusting the science, it works. It actually works." Morrison looked at this young woman, barely 24, raised in a small town in Texas, told by her high school guidance counselor that military service wasn't for girls like her, who'd just done something extraordinary. "What are you going to do now?" Martinez wiped her eyes, straightening. "I'm going to teach someone else how to do it, pass it forward, just like you did." That evening, Morrison sat in her office at Fort Benning, updating the training records. Corporal Sarah Martinez, 4,215 yards, confirmed kill on target, wind conditions moderate, preparation time 7 hours. The new standard. Her phone rang, an unfamiliar number with a 202 area code, Washington, D.C. "Master Sergeant Morrison." "Master Sergeant, this is Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Chen. I don't know if you remember me." "Staff Sergeant Chen from Outpost Delta," Morrison interrupted, smiling. "Of course I remember. Congratulations on the promotion, sir." "Thank you. I heard about Corporal Martinez's record today. I wanted to call personally and say, what you're building there at Fort Benning, it's bigger than just training snipers. Sorry. Chen's voice carried weight emotion. Rodriguez's daughter Emma is 3 now. He brings her to veteran events, tells her the story about the woman who saved her daddy with an impossible shot. Last week, she told me she wants to be a math soldier when she grows up. He paused. Morrison, you changed the trajectory of that family's entire future. Emma exists because you did the math. Morrison felt her throat tighten. Sir, I was just doing your job, I know, but your job changed everything. Chen's tone shifted, became official. The reason I'm really calling, we're establishing a new advanced training program for extreme long-range precision, combining the best elements of sniper training with applied mathematics and environmental analysis. We want you to design the curriculum. Sir, I'm honored, but before you say no, let me tell you who else is involved. Sergeant Cooper, you remember him. He's been teaching at the Scout Sniper School, completely changed his approach after Afghanistan. He says you taught him that experience needs to be paired with science. And Private Williams, the scared kid from the outpost. He's now a ranger instructor, teaching his students that courage comes from preparation. Morrison was quiet, processing this. The ripples from one shot spreading farther than she'd ever imagined. We're calling it the Morrison Method, Chen continued. A systematic approach to extreme-range shooting that combines fieldcraft, mathematics, environmental analysis, and psychological preparation. 37 variables that saved 32 lives. We want to teach it to everyone. The Morrison Method, she repeated, feeling strange about having her name attached to something so significant. You changed the game, Master Sergeant. Not just for women, though that matters. You changed it for everyone. You proved that impossible is just another variable to calculate. 6 months later, the first Morrison Method class graduated. 60 students, 37 men, 23 women representing 12 different nations. They'd spent 16 weeks learning not just to shoot, but to think, to calculate, to prepare so thoroughly that when the impossible moment arrived, they were ready. Morrison stood before them at graduation, looking at faces that would go on to serve in places she'd never see, to make shots she'd never know about, to save lives that would ripple forward through generations. You came here to learn how to make impossible shots, she began. But that's not really what I taught you. I taught you that impossible is just a word people use for things they haven't prepared for properly. I taught you that doubt is fuel. I taught you that competence has no gender, no race, no background. It only has preparation and results. She looked at Lieutenant Chen, sitting in the front row beside Cooper, Rodriguez, and Williams, all of them together for the first time since Afghanistan. Rodriguez held a photo of Emma, now 3.5, clutching a toy rifle and wearing her father's old patrol cap. That shot in Afghanistan, 187 yards, it wasn't about the distance. It was about what happens when you refuse to accept limitations, when you do the work nobody sees, when you trust mathematics over fear. Morrison's voice carried across the silent assembly. Some of you will break my record, some of you already have, and that's exactly how it should be, because records aren't made to last, they're made to be surpassed. She pulled out her weathered green notebook, the one she'd carried in Afghanistan, now laminated and preserved. Every shot begins with observation. Every impossible thing becomes possible when you break it into variables you can understand and control. And every legend, she looked at her students, is just a person who refused to quit calculating when everyone else had given up. After graduation, Morrison found Corporal Martinez packing her gear, preparing to ship out to her first operational assignment. Nervous? Morrison asked. Terrified, Martinez admitted, but using it as fuel like you taught me. Good, where are they sending you? Can't say exactly, but it's somewhere that might need someone who can make impossible shots. Martinez smiled. I've got your notebook memorized, 37 variables. I added 3 more based on my own observations. 40 variables, even better. Morrison handed her a small package. This is for you. Martinez opened it. Inside was a green notebook, identical to Morrison's, blank pages waiting to be filled. On the first page, Morrison had written, "Legends aren't born, they're calculated. Pass it forward." Martinez's eyes filled with tears. "Master Sergeant, You don't need me anymore, Corporal. You've got the math. You've got the preparation. You've got the mindset. Now go teach someone else." Morrison smiled. "And when you make a shot that rewrites the record books again, and you will, remember to show them your notebook. Let them see the work behind the legend." That night, Morrison sat on the Fort Benning observation deck, watching the sun set over the training ranges where the next generation was learning to turn impossibility into mathematics. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number, just a photo. Emma, now 3.5, wearing her father's patrol cap, holding a toy rifle with a caption that read, "I'm gonna be a math soldier like Miss Riley." Morrison smiled, saving the photo. This was the real legacy, not the record books or the viral videos or the Morrison Method curriculum. It was Emma growing up knowing her father. It was Martinez preparing to pass forward what she'd learned. It was Cooper's daughter starting basic training with confidence instead of doubt. It was a generation of soldiers, men and women, who'd learned that competence, not gender, pulled the trigger. Somewhere in Afghanistan, there was a cave 4,187 yards from an old outpost. A cave that hadn't fired a shot in 3 years. A cave that represented the moment when mathematics defeated distance, preparation overcame doubt, and one woman proved that impossible was just another variable waiting to be calculated. The shot had lasted 6 seconds. The legend was still being written. And it was being written by 40 variables, countless students, and the simple truth that Riley Morrison had proven on a hot day in the Hindu Kush. Impossible doesn't exist. It just hasn't been properly calculated yet.